Nigeria has had many leaders, some revered, some people don't like, but few have shaped the country's destiny like General Muhammadu Buhari before and President Muhammadu Buhari after he got elected as President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria in 2015. A stern general turned Democrat, people say, a man praised for his integrity and blamed for duplicity and making things harder for the people of Nigeria. Buhari's story is the story of Nigeria's struggle for order, justice, and survival. It is a story, too, of fall from grace to grass, some people may say. Born in 1942 in Daura, present-day Katsina State, Muhammadu Buhari joined the Nigerian army at the age of 19 in 1961. He trained in the United Kingdom, India, and the United States of America. Thereafter, he rose in the ranks of the Nigerian army. He fought the Nigerian Civil War and rose to become the governor of the northeastern state of Nigeria after states were created in 1967 by General Yakubu Gowon. The northeastern states today comprise of parts of Taraba State, Borno State, Yobe State, Adamawa State, and Bauchi States. As well, in 1975, he was appointed the military governor of the northeastern state by General Murtala Mohammed. Between 1976 and 1978, he served as the Federal Commissioner for Petroleum and Natural Resources under General Olusegun Obasanjo. Between 1977 and 1978, he was the chairman of the Nigerian Petroleum Corporation. He went back to the barracks when the military handed over power in 1979. By 1982, the civilian government started experiencing severe economic stress amidst unrest and allegations of electoral fraud. The military struck again in December 1983, just 3 months into the second tenure of the democratic government. The coup was announced by General Sani Abacha. General Muhammadu Buhari, who was the commander of the 3rd Armored Division in Jos, was announced as the head of state and the chairman of the Supreme Military Council. In the over 1 year that he was the military head of state, he implemented several programs, including the following. 1. War Against Indiscipline. This was a national campaign aimed at restoring public morality, cleanliness, punctuality, and patriotism. It enforced queues at bus stops, tidy environments, and general civic conduct. To fight the economic stress that the country was going through, Buhari adopted stringent economic measures, including currency control and import restrictions to manage Nigeria's declining oil revenues and external debts. He also embarked on an aggressive anti-corruption drive. His first target were the governors and the political officials who were in government from 1979 to 1983 when he took over. As a matter of fact, some of the civilian governors that were brought before military tribunals were sentenced to as much as 100 years, and many of them languished in detention for very long terms. To enforce order, the head of state and the Supreme Military Council promulgated the infamous Decree Number 4, which curtailed press freedom, allowing for detention of journalists for stories that were deemed to be offensive or embarrassing to the government. As a matter of fact, several journalists, including Tunde Irabo, were detained for several months because of the decree. Critics such as Fela Ransom Kuti were also jailed. As well, Decree Number 2 gave security agencies broad powers to detain individuals indefinitely without trial. It promulgated a decree that was used to try some drug traffickers, and the drug traffickers were executed in spite of the fact that the crimes that they committed were committed before the laws were enacted. This, of course, brought about huge outcries around the world because laws are not supposed to be retroactive. Punish people for offenses that they committed before certain laws were made. 1 year, 8 months after, his military colleagues got fed up with him. They accused him of rigidity and inability to manage the economy as the economic woes of the country continued to increase. In 1985, his military colleagues removed him in a palace coup. The coup announcement was made by Brigadier General Joshua Nemiel Dogonyaro. General Muhammadu Buhari was put into detention, and some of the journalists that were detained by him were released. Some of the politicians that were also detained by him were released, as the new government sought legitimacy in some of the actions that they took. For most of the time after he was released from detention, General Muhammadu Buhari kept away from public view. The only news about him that were made public were his disagreements with his wife, who had gone to receive assistance from the military colleagues who had taken over government from him. As a matter of fact, the story is that he divorced his wife, who had gone to receive assistance from his military colleagues who were now in government to pay the children's school fees. And he did not participate in any political activities again until he was appointed the chairman of the Petroleum Task Force, a fund that was set up by General Sani Abacha to manage the funds that were gained from the withdrawal of subsidy from petroleum products. For several years, Buhari stayed away from politics, but by 2003, he was back, this time as a civilian, a Democrat who espoused democratic values, and he wanted to become president. He contested and lost the presidential elections in 2003, 2007, and 2011. He cried foul and pursued his case unsuccessfully through to the Supreme Court. He cried in public and said he would no longer contest elections until President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, then leader of the ACN, convinced him to try again. And then he did. He tried another fourth time, and he was lucky this time. 2015, at 72 years old, Buhari finally won, defeating the incumbent President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan. Again, as it happened in when he took over government from the civilian government, he set out his agenda, and this included anti-corruption. He launched investigation into former government officials. The EFCC prosecuted several high-profile figures, including former ministers and military chiefs. His second agenda was Boko Haram, which he said he was going to defeat. As a matter of fact, at an earlier period, the Boko Haram had nominated him, President Muhammadu Buhari, then General Muhammadu Buhari, to be their mediator in the planned discussion with the government. Of course, by the time he took over, the Boko Haram was controlling several areas in Adamawa, Borno, and Yobe states. One of the promises he made Nigerians, to which several Nigerians thought as a former military officer at the highest level, he would and had the capacity and willingness to defeat Boko Haram. Down the line, he said Boko Haram had been technically defeated. As a matter of fact, the military top brass presented to him the flag of Boko Haram, which they said symbolized the defeat or the technical defeat of Boko Haram. He also wanted to pursue economic policies that will reduce the poverty that Nigerians had. Immediately he got into power, Nigeria entered into a recession due to falling oil prices and several policy missteps. One of the major problems that he faced was that when he got into office, it took him over 6 months to decide on who would be in his cabinet. And when he decided to announce the cabinet, the names were familiar names, which may as well would have been announced on the very first day that he took over power. And in the management of the currency, the Buhari government maintained multiple exchange rates, leading to criticisms from economists and international institutions. The currency as well fell from the 180 naira to a dollar, as at the time President Goodluck Jonathan was taking over, to over 400 naira per dollar by the time he was handing over to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu in 2023. He faced several controversies during his 8 years in office. There was the rumor spread by the IPOB that he had died in a London hospital and that a Jibril from Sudan, a lookalike, had been trained to come and play his role while some northern cabal held power in the villa. His long stay in the hospital also elicited so much controversy during his first term. All these controversies did not stop him from being re-elected for a second term. In his second term, that is between 2019 and 2023, the economic instability worsened by the COVID pandemic. There was high inflation and unemployment rose. The naira weakened significantly and fuel and food prices soared. There was a protest by youths. A nationwide youth-led protest against police brutality culminated in the Lakewood Gate shooting. This attracted attention and several parliamentary hearings. The administration was slow to respond, and up to now, there are allegations that some of the youths that were said to have been kidnapped have not been returned. As at yet, no one knows exactly the number of people that were killed in that protest. The security situation which he made expanded during his second term. Bandits, as they call them, or kidnappers, took over most of the Northwest, the areas where President Muhammadu Buhari comes from. As a matter of fact, his state, Katsina, was one of the states that was most affected by the activities of these violent non-state actors. Several school children were kidnapped, running into hundreds, and several hundreds of millions of naira were paid to these kidnappers as ransom. Of course, it was not all bad news. He completed the Abuja-Kaduna Railroad. He completed the second Niger bridge that was initiated by the previous government and not completed. Some road projects in Nigeria were completed. He signed into law in 2021 the Petroleum Industry Act, PIA, to reform Nigeria's oil and gas industry. And during the election, or just before the 2023 election, there was the central bank's controversial currency design, which created massive cash shortages that disrupted the economy and daily lives of people. Of course, this was said to be aimed at curbing vote buying, but it led to widespread suffering, and the policy has since been abandoned. When the news of his death came in on Sunday afternoon, the reactions, as expected, were varied. Of course, there were people who praised him for the work that he had done. He was admired by several people for his discipline and integrity. People give him as an example, as a rare example of an incorruptible leader in Nigeria's political history. He said Spartan lifestyle and anti-corruption stance today resonates with many people. He is also praised by some of his admirers for his commitment to Nigerian unity. Of course, someone that has been president of Nigeria for 2 terms, spent almost 9.5 years ruling Nigeria, will have people who admire him and those that do not think he did well. There are people who said he was disciplined and had integrity. They cite him as a rare example of an incorruptible leader in Nigeria's political history. His Spartan lifestyle and anti-corruption stance resonate with many. As well, people believe that he is a nationalist who has shown commitment to the unity of Nigeria and as a symbol of northern military discipline and patriotic resolve. His supporters also cite his government's dedication to building roads, bridges, railways, and power infrastructure. And he was seen as someone who was consistent and believed in what he was doing. He contested the elections 5 times, won 2 times, lost 3 times. Of course, there are many who think otherwise. There are people who see him as a stubborn person that does not follow what other people suggest. It must be what he thinks that he does. And that was the reason that his colleagues used to throw him out of government in 1985. They accuse him of repressing dissent, disobeying court orders, and suppressing free speech. Other people accuse him of being nepotic. They recall that or call attention to his appointments that they were skewed in favor of his religion and ethnicity. In terms of security, his critics call attention to the fact that he left the country worse than he met it. By the time he took over government, the security situation had confined itself to the northeast. By the time he was leaving, the security situation had expanded to the northwest, north central, and even to parts of the south. He was accused of mismanaging the economy, and of course, among the people who make this accusation of his mismanaging the economy, officials of the government that took over from him in 2023. They accused him of mishandling the economy, and they said they made the economy dead, and they had problems or have problems trying to revive an economy that was dead by the time they took over from him. For many, Buhari's 8 years were a missed opportunity to regain the name that he ought to have written on gold for history. He was full of promise, but short on delivery. Some commentators have said that the 8 years of President Muhammadu Buhari in Aso Rock removed the veil of a dignified, competent nationalist and removed the myth of General Muhammadu Buhari, a man that had no corruption, a man that loved all Nigerians, a man who would change the fate of the poor in Nigeria. Of course, they said this because by the time he was leaving, the security situation had worsened and the economy was also having problems. And the people who took over from him, his party members, said that he left the economy in a very bad state, that they were being forced to revive economy that was virtually dead. And among people in the human rights community, he is also accused of eroding the gains made under President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua and President Goodluck Jonathan on electoral reforms. Now Nigeria, they say, has become a laughingstock in the Committee of Nations because Nigeria's elections look like a joke, and people are wondering when Nigeria will ever make it again as far as the electoral system is concerned. On May 29, 2023, President Muhammadu Buhari bowed out after 8 years as president. He returned to Daura in Katsina State to rest, reflect, and perhaps to watch how history will judge him. Now he has not lived long enough to see how history will judge him. Then came the story of his illness in London and rumors of his death. These were denied by government and family members. Then came the news on Sunday afternoon. President Muhammadu Buhari had died in London. And of course, immediately, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu dispatched the vice president and the chief of staff to London to go and bring his corpse for burial. The reactions following his death had varied.